Welcome to Good Money Moves, the show where we share financial tips and advice to help you feel financially empowered. I'm Jenna Tauble, and with me today is LeAnne Trom, our Loan Administration Manager here at First Alliance Credit Union, and she is joining me today to talk all about budgeting basics. So thank you so much, LeAnne, for being here. I'm really excited to have you. Before we dive into the topic, why don't you just share a little bit about yourself and your role here at the credit union?
You bet. Well, thanks for having me, Jenna. As you had indicated, I am the manager of our loan administration. I have had the luxury of serving several roles here at the credit union because I've been with the credit union for almost 20 years now. So I've been in collections, member services, consumer loan processing. So wore a few hats and able to meet a lot of people, a lot of our great members, and provide a lot of information and learn a lot as well.
Yeah, you've seen it all. Well, let's dive into our topic. So let's just start off with, what is a budget? What does that mean? If somebody's never heard that, how would you explain that to them?
Well, I think essentially a budget it's a financial plan. Where are you spending your money? And I feel sometimes a budget kind of gets a negative connotation, like, oh, you need a budget. No, I don't. A budget is, again, what is my income? What are my expenses? What are my goals? Mm-hmm. It's really just kind of thinking ahead, planning, whether it's monthly, quarterly, yearly. And it's just, where am I spending my money?
Yeah, think of it like as a spending plan, maybe, versus like that, because you're right, that word budget gets such a negative connotation. People hear that and they go, oh, that means I have to be like restricted in some way, and that can feel not positive. But if you think of it as more of this is the plan I have for spending my hard-earned money, that feels a little more empowering. So I like how you explained it. It's really more of a plan. It's a guide for using your money.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's maybe just talk a little bit about why it's so important. It's so foundational to have good money management, to have a budget.
Well, I think it is a good idea because, again, we just said, where am I spending my money? What is my income? What are my expenses? What do I need to plan for? What are my goals? Mm-hmm. Are my goals to go on a vacation? Are my goals to pay off my home? Is my goal retirement? I mean, there's going to be different goals at various life stages and at times in your life. And I just really think by looking at it, tracking it, it just makes you so much more aware of what you're spending funds on or what the goals are. You could, if you have a partner or a family, I think you should involve them as well, because you may have a short-term goal, you might have a long-term goal.
Yeah.
So again, tracking that, being aware.
Yeah, being just more transparent with yourself about where you're spending money, and is it in the ways to help you reach the goals, or is it being spent on frivolous things that you didn't realize you were maybe spending that much on? And how do you then maybe redistribute the expenses that you have to better meet the goals and spend it in the way that you want? But you would never know that if you didn't take the time to put together that budget, essentially.
Right. I think it can almost give you a financial freedom. You're like, oh my gosh, I paid everything. I saved for this. I put this aside. And now there's something I kind of want. So I can reward myself, or I can reward a family member, or I can spend a little bit more money on a birthday present or something. Mm-hmm. So I just think it also, again, it's rewarding. Yeah. It's controlling. There's a freedom as well.
Yeah. I like that you use that word control, because I think taking the time to put together a budget really does put you in control of your money, instead of your spending being in control of your money, and you're not really thinking about it or being intentional with how you want to spend your hard-earned money. Mm-hmm. How does somebody get started with a budget if they've never budgeted before? What are the steps?
Okay. Well, I think you really look at what is your income, or what's the household income, and what is that net income? So after taxes, after certain state taxes, federal taxes, benefits, whatever those things are coming out. Mm-hmm. I really think it's important to look at your net income Now, it could change depending upon your job or your household income.
Yeah.
However, if you have a fixed income and it's pretty constant, let's take that net income and say, yep, here's my income, here's my bills. This is what I have to pay. This is what I'm already required to pay, whether it be rent or a mortgage or a car payment or a credit card payment or insurance, my cell phone, all those kinds of living expenses.
Yeah.
Figure out what those are. Write it down. I really think it's important writing it down.
Yes.
People have different methods or different ways it works for them. Mm-hmm. Sometimes just, again, it doesn't have to be a fancy Excel sheet. Mm-hmm. You can just start by simply writing it down and having that visual.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that you talk about writing it down and just really solidifying what those numbers actually are. And I like that you say it doesn't have to be overly sophisticated. And, on our website, firstallianceu.com, we actually have several different worksheets that you can download from a sophisticated Excel spreadsheet, like you mentioned, but also just a one-pager that really just kind of breaks down what is my cash flow in a month? What does that look like for me? And to really kind of paint that picture, because if you're just trying to do it mentally in your head all the time, you're going to miss things, you're going to overlook things, you're going to estimate things that either over or under what they actually are, and you're not going to get that clear picture. So I think you're right. Writing it down is the first step, mm-hmm. even if it's super, super simple on just the back of a piece of paper or a note card or something.
Yeah.
I think that's great advice.
Just things that brings it to reality. And, even just combing through your financial statements or just looking if you're using your online banking. Oh my gosh, here's my debits, here's my credits. Where did this go?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great point. Use those statements that you get every month as a starting point to kind of go back a month, 2 months, 3 months, just to kind of get a feel for what that regular spending looks like, because you're not going to spend the same amount on groceries every month. You're not going to spend the same on utilities every month. It's going to fluctuate. So going back and looking at that stuff can be really helpful to kind of give you an average of what you're spending to help you plan a little better. I think that's a great point.
Exactly.
What about for someone who maybe has more of an irregular income? Maybe they wait tables and they rely heavily on tips. That's not always consistent, or they are freelancing, so they don't always have the same kind of work. How can somebody in that position still budget?
Okay. I think it's the same thing. What is your average? Is there an average income? Is there an average tips? Is there an average commission? And looking at that and saying, okay, these are my bills. These are my expenses. I have to pay every month. So if you kind of maybe take that average, and then that's where it goes into maybe your cushion or your rainy day fund, or maybe even an emergency fund. So you really have to look and dedicate that line item, that budget, that miscellaneous, and say, you know what, next month I might be a little short. I don't want to be short in making my payment because I really need to do that. Mm-hmm. Set that aside. Have a miscellaneous expense or a miscellaneous emergency fund, whatever you want to call it. But plan. Have that cushion. Yeah. You got to discipline yourself so you're not cut short when you maybe didn't make that tip or that commission that you had anticipated.
Yeah. So it's really about just being mindful and planning ahead for knowing that there are going to be months where things are less, and then you're going to, in those months where you have more, take that more and set it aside to make sure that you're able to kind of even that out throughout the month. I think that makes a ton of sense.
Exactly.
Yeah. What are maybe some common mistakes that you see people making when trying to budget?
I think in some things, maybe over or underestimating. There are going to be some things that are fixed. Mm-hmm. So please make sure you put it down. Here's my fixed. If you're estimating, then that's going to get a little bit trickier. So again, what are my fixed? What are my musts? What do I need to do? Mm-hmm. That would be one of the biggest things, I think, of just not really looking and saying, well, I really did spend this last month, or just saying, oh, mentally, yeah, I spent that. No, look at it. Again, look at your online banking statements. What did I actually spend in dining out? What did I spend on that grocery item? Yeah. Just being really realistic again. Yeah. And not beating yourself up, but just saying, oh my gosh, I did spend this, so I need to be more realistic, or I can cut back on something. So just don't overestimate or underestimate, really.
Yeah, set realistic goals is kind of what I'm hearing you say when it comes to budgeting. Because, I think you're right. It can be really almost demotivating if you're just starting out trying to figure out your budget and get in the habit of doing that on a regular basis. And then you maybe make a couple mistakes along the way and you're like, oh, well, what's the point of this? I can't even do it right. But to your point, like, you might start there, but the more you do it month over month, eventually you're going to get it figured out and you're going to get into a rhythm and you're going to have a better sense of what you're really spending and what's coming in. Are there any other mistakes or like setbacks that you see people having when it comes to budgeting?
Well, actually, again, I kind of referred to earlier was, do you have a partner? Do you have a spouse? Do you have a family? And I think having that discussion together and having those common goals, I know a person I used to work with, I would say, well, have some financial intimacy with your partner. Yeah. Let's talk about it. What are the goals together? Even if maybe you have different accounts, maybe you don't blend all your funds together. Sure. But if you have a common goal as a partner or couple, talk about it, reevaluate it, and do it every month, every 2 months. Always kind of reevaluate and give yourself that grace. Oh my gosh, we had to put new tires on the car. Well, that went a little bit into our vacation budget. So talking to each other and not pointing fingers, well, you spent, so I'm going to spend. Yeah. Oh my gosh, no, don't do that. That makes no sense to me at all. Have that honest conversation and that goal so you can reward each other and be happy about your decisions and not have any type of tension and just be honest and clear with each other.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. You can't, if you live in a household with other people, you can't budget by yourself. Like, you have to include others. You have to have those conversations. And to your point, sometimes that can be really hard and it can feel very intimate to have to talk about that stuff, but you're never going to be successful with budgeting if you're not including all of the people that are affected by the money coming in and the money going out in your household. I think that's great advice.
Yeah, I think you're training your children as well. Yeah. I think you should talk about it at a young age and say, well, this is what I've allowed, or this is what our budget for this, or this is what we want you to put in your piggy bank. I think teaching that young and sharing those things are important as well. And that I feel sometimes people make that mistake and they don't tell their children, or they want to give them something and aren't not necessarily honest about it. Like, no, honey, I'm sorry, we can't get this time. Yeah. Maybe next time.
It's not in the budget. Yeah, no, I love that you bring that up. We actually talked a couple episodes ago with Danielle about teaching kids how to save money, and, learning from their parents is a huge component of that. And I think including kids in those budgeting conversations is a great way to kickstart that financial literacy in kids. And budgeting shouldn't be a scary word for kids to learn either. I love that you brought that up. Can you share maybe some examples of how you've seen members' lives change for the better after you or someone on your team has helped them create a budget for the first time, and like, how has that impacted them?
Well, I believe the impact has come from I did it, or I paid this, or I've used a snowball effect and I've paid this smaller bill, then I've taken the funds to pay another bill. So the success has been when something's been paid off. Mm-hmm. I think that's the biggest reward that I've seen members have with their budgeting. Mm-hmm. I did it, and I can take this payment. And again, like I said, snowball effect, I can put it towards the next thing and have that financial freedom. Or maybe don't use that credit card anymore. I just put that aside because I paid that. Yeah. It's zero. I'm not paying finance charges for that bill anymore, so I can use that for the next step. So again, to go back to your question, really the budgeting, the biggest reward I've seen is that financial freedom and that, oh, I own my car now. Or I don't have that car bill, I can put that now in my savings or my rainy day fund. And again, going back to just where's my money going, and not making it seem like I have to budget because I'm not spending my money wisely. Mm-hmm. Again, it's not negative, but it brings reality.
Yeah. Yeah, well, so it sounds like going through that budgeting process just has really helped our members reprioritize where they want their money to go, right? If they really want to have their debt paid down quickly, the only way that you can do that is to understand how much you have coming in, what you have going out as far as, those fixed things that you talked about or those variable things, and just looking at that holistically and going, is this really helping me achieve the goals, my financial goals that I want? So I'm glad that you kind of pointed out it's really that foundation to doing any of those things and reaching any of those goals is having that budget. What other budgeting tips do you think our listeners should know?
Well, I think I mentioned it earlier, Jenna, that really just reviewing it. Don't beat yourself up. Again, what are your realistic goals? What kind of method are you going to use? I mean, there's different methods. Some people will say, I only use cash. I won't write a check.
Yeah.
I'm going to put this cash in an envelope, and this is for this. This is for this. And it seems maybe archaic, but it works for some people. Mm-hmm. So what works for one person might not work for the next. We all have our own ways of succeeding and what works for us. So, there's a 50-30-20 rule. Here's 50% of my net income goes towards my needs. Here's 30% maybe my wants, and here's 20% maybe towards my savings. Yeah. So, some people look at their budget every month and they earmark everything. Expenses, groceries, birthday, property taxes, gas, and they bring everything down to zero because they name everything. Yeah. I'm not saying you need to do that, but that is a method that works for some people as well. So, again, really being honest with yourself, being honest with your family, talking about it, readjusting, and rewarding yourself and celebrating.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned that there's different ways to go about budgeting, that envelope method. I know you said it sounds archaic, and it kind of does, but if you're struggling with overspending, I always think that envelope method is a really great way to live within your means if that's something that you're trying to learn to do. And in this day and age, I feel like you could almost do it digitally by just setting up different accounts in your online banking and figure out, this one's for my groceries only, this one's for my utilities and my rent and all that stuff. There's ways to still go about doing that. And then I think the zero-based budgeting is the one that you mentioned last, where you give every single dollar of your income a job down to the penny. And that's how I started budgeting, because I was like, I just need to understand where my money's going. Why am I always out of money before the month is done, right? When I was younger, so that method really helped me just understand my expenses really, really well. So it's great that you brought up that there's truly is different ways to get to the same results, and It's different for everybody. Yep. Well, thank you so much, LeAnne, for being here today. This was a great conversation. Thank you for tuning in. This has been Good Money Moves. Please make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you want to learn more about budgeting basics, visit our website at firstalliancecu.com. We'll see you next time.